He lives in White Plains, but he does Iona, he does West Point. And we've got 2 professors in the back, and hopefully we can get you closer to Monroe down the road.
Okay.
Professor Mitchell is in charge of all the media marketing and broadcasting side of the sports club. Professor G is associated with me on the sports marketing side. And all these students are a mix of sports club and marketing media club. And unfortunately, Ken, it's a tough day today. We'd have more people here, but even my class this morning had less than 50% attendance.
Okay,
so,
well, it is.
So it's a tough day. And,
the hardy people got here.
You know, the hardy people got here. Now, your official introduction will be done by Mo. Mo is the president of the sports club, and he's got your bio, and I can get a copy of Ken's bio to anybody who wants it at the end of the meeting. I do have copies of it, and Mo's going to do the introduction as president of the club. And with no more further ado.
Thank you all for coming, and I want everyone to please provide Mr. Is it Kraetzer?
Kraetzer.
Kraetzer. My apologies, Mr. Kraetzer. Warm regards for, he's the executive director of the Central American Legion Radio. As Professor Cuzzy said, I mean, they've handled Army football. I've actually had the privilege of being at an Army game last year. It was a great experience. And Iona. So I know the fact that Iona is in the tournament kind of has you pretty active as well. I'm glad that you've taken the time to come here and help. He's had more than 20 years of experience in social media, in broadcasting and such. And so as the little bit of time that you already experienced, I know that we're going to learn a lot from this gentleman. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be with you today.
Great to be with you.
Again, good to visit Monroe. Very impressive facilities here. And just introduce myself. I got involved with broadcasting when I was in college at Providence, doing the campus radio station, doing ice hockey. And if you follow ice hockey, that particular period was when Lou Lamoriello was a hockey coach at Providence, who went on to the New Jersey Devils and won 3 Stanley Cups. And a fellow named Dave Gavitt was a basketball coach who put the Big East together. So I had a chance to meet some really extraordinary people in the world of sports marketing and sports business who really saw what the future was going to be in subsequent years. I didn't do much in broadcasting for about 25 years. My career has been in banking and financial service marketing. I worked in companies like American Express and Dean Witter and Chase Bank, and I worked for a company, CVSI, up in Harrison. And actually, I do a lot of work with veterans organizations. That's the Sons of the American Legion. We're part of the American Legion, the world's largest veterans organization. And I literally got called by WVOX Radio to do a talk with them on Memorial Day. Some of the activities our host in Pelham was going to do with the parade and visiting military and honoring veterans and those who were lost in service. So we did, and then they said, call us up after and tell us how it went. So I did, and gave a talk on how Memorial Day had gone. And this is all off a written press release. That was the key to it. We sent out a press release on Memorial Day plans to about 20 organizations, media groups, and they called off the paper press release. And I still think there's value in that today. Paper press releases still get priority over anything else if you can take the time to send them out. So they asked me subsequently to start doing a radio show for them. Working with a fellow named Bob Maroney, you may hear on the radio here as a morning show for WVOX. And so we started doing military shows every week and bringing guests, veterans, military members, calling in. One time we worked with the Navy, and they had an admiral in the Indian Ocean call us up off a cruiser that was fighting the Somali pirates. And so they really like getting involved with local radio, local media, who can tell their story. And so one day we had a little extra time, And I said, boy, West Point's got a football game this weekend. Why don't we see if somebody will call us up and tell us about how the team is playing this year and the game. So we did. A fellow named Bob Barretto, who's their assistant athletic director, called in, and we had to talk about the game. The next thing we know, he says, oh, if you're coming up to the game, sit in the post-game press conference with the coach afterwards. So we did, and we haven't missed a press conference since. And it's been really, you meet a lot of people at West Point. The players are extraordinary. Lots of people in the military. One time I was on the sideline, and I saw a guy in a Navy uniform. It's a little unusual at West Point. Navy people really stick out at West Point. So, but then I noticed he had a SEAL badge on from the Navy SEALs, and so I went over to ask him about that, and I talked to him briefly, and then General Dempsey walks up. General Dempsey is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he was at the game, and this Navy officer was his aide for the day. And General Dempsey came up, and he was patient for about 2 seconds, then the aide broke away to take care of what General Dempsey needed. We meet a lot of people that way, and we get chances to interview folks. But what we found, though, a lot of it is by doing day-to-day work, being there in August. We go to August training camp. You know, I was at a practice a couple of years ago. It was 107 degrees on the field. In fact, it was so warm, my cell phone camera stopped working. And we had to move the interviews indoor into the air-conditioned lobby of the locker room building. The coach after games sometimes will tell a reporter, well, if you came out to practice, you know what we're doing. You know, and so a lot of what we do is relationship building and learning about what the team is doing or what a subject is doing, a military group is doing, so that people will start to gain confidence that you know what you're talking about and you'll ask the right questions given the circumstances. So anyway, your name again is? Randy. Why don't we move it up and we'll go through a few of the slides we have. And one of the things that you learn today is that every organization is a publisher. Used to be you had radio stations, local newspapers, regional newspapers, TV stations. And corporations did a little bit of PR. Now nobody waits for the reporter to call or sends a release out. Everybody's doing their own media. I'm sure Monroe College does a lot of its own media. So you try to get your message out yourselves through all the channels that are available, which is increasingly being video. Interviewing professors, interviewing students, interviewing the college president about plans, things that are going on. Getting those things out on as many channels as you can. And how you can tell a story, that's kind of how you attract interest in your organization and your programs. Major social media platforms, you probably are using. What are your favorite social media platforms that you folks use? Because I'll learn something. Tell me, what social media platforms do you guys look at? Instagram?
Snapchat.
Twitter, okay. There's Snapchat.
Yeah,
I gotta learn Snapchat.
I think I'm still the old one. I still use Facebook.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but I know that they're saying the kids are leaving Facebook, so it's...
Yeah, but the adults aren't. And if you want to reach adults, Facebook is still a very strong way. It's really the strongest way to get a message out to the most people at this point, although Facebook's changing how they distribute messages right now. And it's a little hard to figure out. I don't feel like I'm getting as much distribution on Facebook posts this year that I got maybe a year and a half ago. And so that's kind of been a challenge. But what you want to do is get your message out in as many appropriate places as possible. Software and equipment. Smartphone is the greatest innovation for communication that probably has ever been developed. I use a Samsung 8 Plus actually, and I got it in the case wrong. And it's just remarkable. How many of you use Samsung or Apple? Okay, how many use Apple? More than half of you, okay. I don't know, I started on Amazon. I think they're a really good video platform. and a very good camera. And what I do now a lot is I'll take a video and I use a software package called Androvid Pro. I'll try to get some of the equipment names out to you, but it's a $3 app. And it's amazing how much I can do with it, because I can trim a video, which means, let's say you have 3 seconds before of time before your interview really starts, and you want to trim that off, and maybe at the end you're saying, oh, thank you, goodbye, blah, blah, blah. You want to get rid of those 5 seconds. So you use trim to do that, and then also there are ways of merging video together. Like when I cover a football game, you might have pre-game video that we did, maybe something from the Fan Fest, players running out on the field, the band. We might throw in some plays during the game, halftime, and then post-game. And we may want to merge all that together in a 5-minute summary. And you can do that right off an app on a phone. That's what I do on this. I'll show you one later. By the way, can you get into YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll do this. We'll ask you to go into YouTube.
Right now?
Can you do it on a separate screen, or can you have one at a time?
I think
Okay, we'll do it. We'll go to it a little later. And just look up. You go to my account, Ken Kraetzer. I'll give you a card. Anyway, but that's a way. These. I do almost everything on all my editing off my mobile phone, and those are some of the key functions. Cropping. Let's say you have a photo and you want to put it into Twitter. You crop it so you get, you get the subject looking their best, and also you want to brighten. Most every photo I do, I'm looking for a way to brighten it, so it'll pop when it goes out on any of the social media platforms. And and what we found is on equipment, as I was saying earlier, a monopod is a way to start if you're doing this. It's only about $20, and you get a bracket like this to hold the phone. This is probably like $10. You get it on Amazon. It's easier to get on Amazon than in the stores. And you go like this, and I've got a plug-in microphone that I use for this too.
What's the name of the app again?
Androvid Pro. And here is my microphone. And this one's a little fancy. There's a microphone called iRig that's very good. And this one I have a preamp, so I get a little better sound. And we turn that on and plug it in here. And I'm ready to go in a press conference, just like this. Like I was interviewing Iona's basketball coach Sunday night after they heard where they're going in the NCAAs, and there were about 3 reporters, and I had my microphone out just like this, and I'm taking video right off of here, and I'm standing right next to people from Channel 2 News, and they got their big, $30,000. Well, it's probably $30,000, probably $10,000 video camera, and some other ones over there too. But this works just as well. Microphones are really good for like this. This microphone like this is probably $75. iRig is a very good brand, and that's one terrific way, guaranteed, to get the best sound. In doing this kind of work, getting sound is harder than getting video. Video is pretty easy. Getting good sound is always a challenge. It's easier if you're standing and the person you're talking to is standing. If we're sitting down, it's a little more difficult. If I'm sitting here and Professor Cuzzy's there, it's really hard sometimes to go across, and then you switch to what's called a lapel microphone. And they're really not that expensive, but you can put microphones on that'll attach to a collar, and then they'll combine and you can plug them into the phone. Yeah?
What's the name of the microphone again? I'm sorry.
iRig, capital I-R-I-G-G. It's a good brand. They're about 75. There's a better one for like 100. But the key thing on it, I'll tell you the story. When I first started using a microphone going into a phone, I couldn't get it to work. One time I was interviewing the superintendent at West Point, and it was obvious I wasn't getting any sound. I was getting the sound coming from the phone. It was being recorded there. And so I couldn't figure it out. I called people at Verizon, called people at Samsung, asked them to elevate it. Nobody knew the answer to the question about how to get the microphone recognized by the phone. So I'm calling a cable company, because you always are getting these kind of cables, And I had a question, so I found this company in North Carolina, and I called them and I told them my problem, that I couldn't get the microphone to be recognized by the phone. And he said, "Oh, turn the phone on and off." That was the answer to the question, because once I plugged in and turned the phone on and off, it would work. Problem is, my older phone took 45 seconds to turn on, and you can't do that while you're waiting for the football coach to be ready. The newer phones now, you can just plug in, they work, and like this one does, and the iRigs do, and that's a big help, because you got to be ready. And sometimes you can't. You approach somebody and you say, "Can I do an interview?" and you don't want to look like you're ready to go, unless you've got an appointment. So I always tend to kind of then go back to my briefcase, grab my microphone, and plug it in. So that was a big help. But you end up learning little things that make a big difference that aren't on the big Q&A boards even for the big companies. So that's a key help. The other thing you see here is what's called a microphone flag. And this one's got the identification from the American Legion, which is our parent organization, our Sons of the American Legion. These are about $50. There are a couple of companies, they all seem to be in Florida, that do this. And I'm sure, like, if you were doing work for Monroe College, they'd want you to have a microphone flag with their logo on each side of it. Sometimes you get 3-sided, some are 4. But if you're in a press conference or you're talking to somebody, and this is how you get your microphone picked up, and your organizational ID, which is very valuable. I was invited at West Point to sit in a press conference with the Secretary of the Army a couple of weeks ago. He was basically visiting, and they were very conscious of wanting him to have a good experience. I really appreciated being invited. So it was only 3 of us. We ended up sitting down. We had about 5 minutes to figure out the logistics on how we were going to do this. But anyway, we decided I would sit down in a chair next to where the secretary was. And then I ended up I didn't have a stand for my microphone, which was one option, to put it on a stand. So I just put it out there in front of him when he was speaking. And that got picked up by the West Point video. So all the talk with the Secretary of the Army's got my microphone flag in front of him, which isn't bad. People notice that. And another thing we do is, I can use this as an alternative bracket. This is something that is an extra light. And one of the things you're always worrying about in video is getting the best light. So, man, I haven't really used this in a while because my new phone, I got the Samsung 8 Plus around Labor Day, beginning of the football season, and it didn't have a brightness adjustment. Because right now there's a button on here that I can use when I'm in video mode to adjust the light, which is really valuable. And it's hard to see, but if I go to camera, there's a meter right here. I can move it up and down and go really bright. I move it down and up if I don't need extra light. And that makes a big difference. Because a lot of times if you're indoors, you're working in dim light, and you're trying to get extra light. And sometimes, like even in November, I'm covering football practice. Practice ends at 6 o'clock. And it's dark out, and we're working off the light from the light towers on the corner of the field. So extra light, I can get extra light by doing this, which really is a time saver. But I was, again, asking Samsung, every time I talked to somebody at Samsung or Verizon, I said, what happened to light adjustment? It was on the prior model, the 7 Edge. It wasn't on this one. All of a sudden, around Christmas time, it showed up. And I think that they did a update. And that was a big help when they added that. Any questions? Okay, ma'am, go ahead.
So, are you just broadcast as a podcast, or do you also have a terrestrial caller, or how do you broadcast?
Okay, good question. As I said, what we really become is multi-channel, and that means that, like, number one, I do a radio show every Monday at 2:30 on WVOX. We've been doing it for 10 years now. So that's one element. When I do interviews now, I do almost all my interviews, they're in person with video. Okay? So video I put onto YouTube, I put it onto Facebook, and from YouTube I can go into Twitter. Okay? And then on blogs, there are times where we want to talk to somebody and they're not where we can go talk to them. We literally were privileged to talk to a general from the New York National Guard stationed in Ukraine 2 weeks ago. And it took a while to set up, but we got an appointment, and we did a call into what's called blogtalkradio.com, which is a podcast company, and we paid for it, and they can take a phone call from anywhere. I did a business call from an executive that was teaching in Hong Kong this fall. And they call in at the appointed time, and you go through your questions. They give you some answers. You can upload some photos into it, and then you can send the podcast out to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever it is. I find podcasts harder to promote than straight video. There's still nothing like video on Facebook right now for attracting an audience. We sometimes interview some of the cadet players at West Point, and we do the same some of the athletes at Iona. And if you could put in their hometown address, West Point players tend to be from all over the country, and there was a player from a small town in North Carolina, Kannapolis, North Carolina. I had to check the spelling on it. But once I put the URL on Facebook, I hyperlinked to that town, it took off. Because it got into the high school network, it got into the parents network. He's their hero, he's the hometown player who was at West Point, and he had a good game the week before. So we had 10,000 page views on that interview, and that's a lot. I mean, we had 2 million page views on our page, West Point Football Report, this past year. But that's where you can attract an audience. The captions make a big difference. The URLs that you can link to makes a big difference, because we're all trying to attract a crowd, attract an audience. And you have to manufacture it and build it over time. I want to go to the next page, see what else. Okay, this is some of the things. This is an event we covered at West Point, and some of the different things. Ron, I think we cover that. Next one. And we cover, in some of the things we cover, you're looking for things that you want to research, talk to guests about. We're covering the military and veterans is our biggest thing. Healthcare is a huge thing for everybody in the military and for veterans. Concussion awareness is a big thing, because we attended an event at West Point where the Army at West Point and the NFL got together to talk about concussion awareness. And the NFL said, terrible news is coming out about some former players and the impact of concussions, even leading to suicides. And the military, unfortunately, has the same problem. And they think PTSD is one of the causes of very high suicide rate. And what we learned at that event, there were a couple of soldiers who were back from Iraq and Afghanistan. One of them said, if a bomb goes off nearby or a shell lands nearby, everyone may be physically okay, but they may all have concussions from the sound and the impact of the bomb or the explosive. And I didn't realize that. And they said, one officer said, he knew he had gotten a concussion from one of these, but he couldn't leave his soldiers on the field. He couldn't go back and get treatment, and he just had to stay there until the situation had calmed down. But there are a lot of concern about long-term impact of concussions, and we've been looking into that. We do things with New York City Fleet Week and Navy League in New York City. It was an interesting story. I went to a Navy League event in New York about a year ago, and the speaker was an officer who was talking about their new airplane, the F-35, the most expensive plane our country has ever built. And he said they're coming around, they're going to be a great plane for the Navy. So afterwards, I interviewed the gentleman, and I asked him about things that he had talked about in the event, so he could do a quick 4-minute summary. And then I said, you're always looking for what is it somebody wants to talk about. Anything like you do, if you do interviews, you're trying to find out what does somebody want to talk about. So I asked him, what was the favorite thing you did in the Navy? And he had been in the Navy for almost 30 years, and he said, commanding officer, USS Nimitz. And he had been commander of one of the Navy's aircraft carriers. And then it hit me that I had seen on the Science Channel a video on the Nimitz. It's one of the country's key assets, the first of its class. It's aging now, it's almost 40 years old now. this gentleman was the host of that show. He was the commanding officer when they did the show. And so it's kind of neat how, you actually meet people that you see on television sometimes. We do a lot of things. We work with the Girl Scouts and football, West Point and Iona basketball. Okay, next one. Okay, innovations. One of the things here, Facebook Live, you know what that is? Streaming video. I do it right off my phone. Again, set it up in the stand, turn it on, and we're broadcasting. You always, as a broadcaster now, are debating, and I've heard people at schools tell me the same thing, whether you record an event live under regular video, or do you go on a Facebook Live, where the quality is usually not as good, but it's live. And part of that is if the video is, if you only can do one method, I normally try to do both. If I'm doing Facebook Live streaming, it could be Periscope on Twitter, and you can do streaming video off of YouTube. The thing on it is I may do two cameras. I may use that camera to get best quality for later, for putting it up on YouTube, and I may use the phone just to do it for immediate to get it out on one of my Facebook pages. Okay, like we're doing a post game at Iona following one of their basketball games. We'll go up on Facebook Live so people can see it right away. But then sometimes we'll take the video and then we'll do a regular standard video on this where you get better quality and put it up on YouTube, and that sometimes has more legs. It'll do well if it has something that has lasting value. Like one of the things we're privileged to do is be a graduation at West Point. And what's our tradition of graduation at West Point and the service academies? They toss their caps right at the end. So as a media person, we're allowed to stand up right by the stage in front of where the Corps is. They take their commissioning oath, and then they've received their diplomas, and they get this, and the first captain says dismissed, and they toss their caps. So we were able to go up right in front, and I usually use this because it's the easiest just to maneuver. And that's usually our biggest, most watched video of the year. And because the Academy's doing their own video live, I want to get the best recording because I'll get comments about that months and even years later. So you have to kind of look about, if you think something's got lasting value, you go for the best quality. If something like, if you're doing a sports pre-game show, it's irrelevant once the game starts, so you want to just get it out there as fast as you can. How many of you realize that Twitter expanded in November? What did Twitter do in November? Yeah, they doubled. They went from 120 something to about 280, which means you can really write something. You're not constantly abbreviating every other word. So that's been helpful. What they also did on Twitter is they expanded seconds to about 45. And so you can show a pretty good video in 45 seconds. I can also do a pre-event introduction in 45 seconds. You have to watch. It's hard to say, well, let's say an intro a basketball game or intro a speaker or an event that way, but you can in 45 seconds, so you can upload that. So again, I'll do a video off of here, I'll record it, and then I'll put it on YouTube, and from YouTube I can go straight into Twitter and do that in a couple of minutes. And it's also, I can put it into Facebook that way. Does that make sense? Very, very useful, and Twitter doubled the amount of characters and video time that you can upload. Another thing we do is called Frame Grab. It's again one of the features in the software on Android Vid Pro. It's probably on all the other packages. A lot of times I'll want to video an event, like I was at an Army football game last year where they won a trophy. And so, it's hard to keep hitting a camera to get the best moment. Although you may know how to do it, how to do a burst frame. But what I do is I just simply take video of let's say, the ceremony. And at this presentation, afterwards, there were two captains holding the trophy, and the guy on the near side was easy to see. The guy on the far side was hard to see. And I found one frame of the video where you could see both players' faces. And that's the frame that I'd used for covering that ceremony of getting a trophy. And so frame grab can be very valuable if you have to take a picture of something that's moving, or it's there's some time activity. Does that make sense? Very, very valuable unless you are shooting photography that's going to be enlarged and printed. Then you want to use a better camera like that one. And the other thing we're doing now is we're monetizing on Facebook, where we have 7 paid sponsors for our coverage, our media coverage. And what we do is now is on Facebook, on the postings relevant to football or basketball, we start putting in their contact information on each post. And that allows us, we've almost half covered our expenses. We're hopefully break even soon. But we can put in sponsor names right under the information, let's say the introduction to a video. We can do that on Facebook. So we've done it on Twitter a little bit. I'm still experimenting with that.
Yeah, that's I was going to ask, do you have your own separate from Facebook blog or website that generates ad revenue as well, like the sponsorship revenue and things like that?
Well, actually, blogs are a good question. Any of you maintain a blog yourself on WordPress? What do you do your blog on?
I do like media, any sort of media like movies and television.
Okay. How do you promote it to attract viewers?
Usually I have my aunt help me with branding my name, or I just put on my other posts.
So you put it on your Twitter page or your
Twitter,
or Facebook, whatever.
Tumblr.
Okay. Which is the best way to draw an audience of those media channels?
Usually I find that Facebook works better.
Okay. Well, that's what we find. The thing we are still working on blogs because we put everything on Facebook first. And what I'm working on is putting things on a blog. The advantage of a blog is it's easier to email out. There's still value in emailing things, especially if there are organizations that might be interested in what you're doing. And blogs lend themselves to being posted on an email better than sending out a Facebook URL. And so there's a value in blogs. Also, people still like to read things. And blogs lend itself. So that's actually on our list to develop a little more fully. Okay, next. Thank you. And just some of the events that we do, I'll pass on that one and go to the next. I just want to mention, this is a gentleman we met, Colonel Greg Gadson. Anyone recognize him by chance? He was in the movie Battleship. Did you see the movie Battleship? He is the Army guy in that movie who is disabled. He lost both legs in service due to an IED. And he's a former Army football player. And he's in the movie Battleship. If you haven't seen it, it's very inspiring to see because he plays himself, basically. But he's an inspirational guy. He's around West Point. He was he's the only officer who came back to take a command after that level of injury, because he became a commander at one of the Army installations in Washington, D.C., coming back from that injury. He's a wonderful spokesman for veterans overcoming disabilities. And I got a chance to talk to him at West Point. He's into art and photography now. And this was actually at an opening of a new art building at West Point. And there I am at with one of the Army women's basketball players at the game, Kelsey Minato, who set their scoring record a couple of years ago. And some of the things, next. And we try to get to as many events as we can in the subjects that we cover. One of the things, I got to know, have you ever heard of Ray Flynn, as a former mayor of Boston? He played in the NIT basketball tournament for Providence years ago. And he became ambassador to the Vatican under Bill Clinton. And he wrote a book about it. And one of the things he said is when you're covering something, he wanted to make sure every time the Pope was out, that the Pope saw him. Every public appearance the Pope had, and he has kind of weekly events and special events. He wanted to make sure that Pope Francis saw Ambassador Flynn. And it got to the point where if he was not at an event, the Pope would say, "Where's Ray today?" And that's how you want to be with how you cover a team, or if you cover City Hall for a newspaper, or whatever it is. That's called having a beat. Where you're there as often as you can, so that the principals, like let's say you covered City Hall in Rochelle, that Mayor Bramson would know you, and and you build a reputation, you build a relationship with people, so that you have a chance to interact with them, ask some questions, do interviews, and so that's very important. So we try to get to as many events as we can, and then all of a sudden the organization sees value in how you cover them, so they invite you to their important dates. Next. And just some of the things we cover. What's neat is this is at the Army-Navy game. All of the Corps of Cadets marches out on the field in their company units. And what we did this year is I was on the field like over here. It was actually snowing like it was today. And I'm over here doing Facebook Live of the cadets marching on the field and marching and giving their commands, and then also marching off the field. Then the brigade of midshipmen goes out. And it was neat to see. We had our second colleague up in the upper deck taking video from up top. So we were covering that event from 2 vantage points, the field, Facebook Live, and recording off of that camera from the upper deck, so we could get perspective like this. This was a couple of years ago and it was a nicer day. I was in Baltimore at the Ravens Stadium. And this is a situation I was telling you about when I used Facebook Live to get a picture. I took video of this presentation. This is at the Cotton Bowl after Army won a bowl game 2 years ago. And that's the frame I grabbed off the video of that moment. Okay, next, sir. And so we try to get to a lot of different things. Twitter is very valuable now for covering events, because nobody sits and waits for the end of the game to start filing reports. Everybody now is either going into their own blog, or they're going out on Twitter, Facebook to some degree. Facebook is hard to cover an event on it, because people tend to see it, look at it later, not immediately. Twitter, everybody is looking at what's passing in front of their eyes at that particular moment. How many of you look at Twitter on a somewhat regular basis? Several of you, yeah. That's where people go to for immediate news. Like you hear something happen, like this morning, the Secretary of State was let go, Secretary Tillerson. First place I'm going to go is Twitter to see if somebody's got a report from the scene, in the first press conference, right? And even at WVOX, the announcers will tell me, do the morning show, they'll look up Rochelle on Twitter to see if anything happened overnight in the city. If there was a fire, some police action, anything might have happened. You kind of look at Twitter first. Okay? And next. And this is an award we give out in honor of 2 football players from Pelham, actually, who went to Morgan State in the 1940s, and they played on a national championship football team. Eugene Evans and Colonel Eli Page Howard, they both signed up for ROTC and were commissioned as Army officers in 49 or 50. Sadly, they both died in service. Eugene Evans in Korea and Colonel Howard in Vietnam, both leading missions. And so we give out an award in memory of them each year. And so it's kind of our plaques. Next. And again, covering some of the things that we do. We talked about some of the ways Facebook. We have multiple pages, and this has been kind of a debate: is how many Facebook pages. You do a separate one by topic. Because I have my own, which I probably have my biggest audience on, but I've got one for our basic military veterans coverage, one for West Point, one for Iona. We have a project at Arlington National Cemetery we're working on, so I have a page for that. And then we work to provide content to our state Sons of the American Legion organization's page. When I say the word content, do you know what you realize how important that word is today? All of this, when you create video, you do an audio interview, you write something, you take a photograph, that's all content creation. And the world is looking for content because there's so much activity, you got so many channels to place things on. So a lot of this is about creating relevant, timely content. And we have YouTube, we have a lot of things. I have different playlists. How many of you have your own YouTube accounts? A couple of you? I somehow managed to have about 2,000 videos on my YouTube page, which is odd. But we'll do 15 videos at a football game, because we'll video each segment. Pregame, fan fest. We video plays, and we'll post them as a group. We'll video halftime. We'll do the post game with the coach and the players. So at the end of a big game, we could have 15 to 20 videos, and we'll put them on an individual playlist for that game. So keeping video separate is one way to keep it organized, because I do some business videos as well, or separate from my kind of sports and veterans, and I can keep them all on a playlist. And that's just light content, you might say, light content. They're all business interviews. I have over 250 on one page. So that, and when I put those out on LinkedIn, how many of you have LinkedIn accounts? Several of you, you want to have a LinkedIn account, because it's all for business and getting a job and finding opportunities. When I go into and put a business video on LinkedIn, instead of doing it for my general listing, which is a mixture of whatever the latest thing was, I go to my playlist for a business interview, and I post from there and put it onto LinkedIn or Twitter, so that the next video up is also kind of light content, another business interview. Does that make sense? It's when you get into it, it's one of those subtleties. Anyway, next. And just some things on interviewing skills. One of the first most important thing in interviewing is knowing someone's name. Because if you're at an event and you want to interview somebody, the most important thing is be able to find the right person you're looking for, and know their name and be able to address them and say, Mr. Smith, I'm Ken Kraetzer from Sons of American Legion Radio. Would you have time, a couple of minutes for an interview? Key is to have their name, then to know something about it. And or a lot of times I do interviews based on hearing a speech, a talk at a trade meeting or a veterans meeting or something, and I'll jot down key points that they talked about so I can ask them just to highlight those. I find asking 3 questions is a fine interview. Because a lot of these things, it's good to do 4 or 5 minutes. Sometimes you're trying to identify if a guest is long answer or short answer. You know the difference between a long answer person and a short answer person. One time, I had back-to-back, I had the academic dean of West Point on for radio interview, and then I had the commandant of cadets. The academic dean, I asked him 3 questions, and that took up 10 minutes, easy. I was trying to make sure I got to the one key question I had for him. When I talked to the commandant, he's he's a good guy, but he's very to the point. His answers were 20 seconds. So I've got, a 10-minute time slot, and so I was starting to get worried when I was on question 7 or 8. Looks like some of you have to leave. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
There's a class that starts at 1 o'clock.
Okay, so we got 3 minutes. So that's kind of, the other key thing about interviewing is let the guests talk. If you do an interview, and this could go you could do an interview for a term paper. Let the guests talk and never guess about a fact. If you're not sure about something in someone's background, ask them. Let them answer the question. A lot of times you say, you might think you know the answer. You don't have to. The reason you're talking to a guest is so they can provide their expertise. So never guess about something when you're doing an interview. Just like if you don't know where a person's from, you say, and you said, I understand you're from Chicago, and the guy says, no, I'm not. I'm really from Indiana. just let the person say where they're from. That avoids a lot of awkwardness in interviews. And then kind of the key is to open up with an easy question. Like if I'm at a practice, the easiest thing for me is to ask a player or coach, how was practice today? And just get them talking a little bit, and then say, well, I know you've been working on this or that, and get into, you have a couple of specifics. You also want to wrap up by having kind of a question that lets them kind of express any point that they may want to talk about in a last question. Always saying to guests, and I always look at interviewing is an opportunity, you're auditioning for the next interview. That you want to build a relationship, especially a first interview could be an introduction. Second one is a chance to go into more depth on details and more specifics. But what you want your guests to feel is that they'd be happy to talk to you again. Then you know you've had a successful interview. Captions are very important. Like if you put something on Facebook, any of these platforms, writing up, you can put, that's where you put specific bio information and contact information. Like a guest may appreciate if you put their organization's URL or a contact phone number. And that's where they may get some very specific value. We talk about authors, and they say you may want to provide the link to their book on Amazon. And so I guess we'll kind of wrap up. You guys have to go to your next class. Is there any particular questions that you may have? Well,
how did you get into this originally? Because you said you actually was in business, so what started you to continue with the interviews? How did you get the skill? Is it just natural, or did you work on it?
Well, unfortunately, I had a little interviewing skill from college, but a lot of time had passed. But actually, I watched some reporters who were covering the Army football team. And like one of them one day is putting up, he's talking to the Army quarterback, and he's going like this, taking video when he asks them the questions after practice one day. And I'm there with my audio recorder, only taking audio. And I realized I got to do the same thing he's doing. I'm taking video, and then I figured out how to post it on YouTube. That took a little struggle to get through, but we finally figured out, how Wi-Fi works and that.
Does Rochelle have a radio station? And what do you think of the opportunity of Monroe College getting on the radio station?
Well, there's WVOX, number one, just across town, and I wouldn't be surprised. I think Monroe College has had some shows on the station. I would also look at, if you have a student radio station, but really right now, what you can do easily is set up an account on a podcasting organization like Blog Talk, where you could have a school account, and then different students could set up and do interviews on that. The other thing you can do pretty easily is, do video interviews, let's say students, faculties, and then post interviews on a YouTube page. And from that, you can send them into, LinkedIn and Facebook as you like. But I would say that's the way. If the school wanted to do something, give you guys a chance to do some practice, is to set up a Blog Talk page, and then set up to do what I'm suggesting on doing video for YouTube. And you can interview professors. We're going to do a term paper on almost anything. You can find an expert in that field and ask to do a video interview with them. And you learn from that. And I'd be happy to help you with that. The other thing I'm looking for is we need some help if anybody who wants to be an intern. We're always in need. We have a very small group. There are times where I can't cover an event because I got two things going simultaneously. So if you're interested in that, let me know. I mean, sometimes I couldn't cover and I own a basketball game. I know Monroe has a very good basketball team too. They were playing in one of the national, I think, junior college tournaments that the American Legion was a sponsor of a year ago. So if anyone, I'll give you a card, but I don't want to make you late for class. And I appreciate your attention and the invitation to talk with you today.
Count on it. I would like to be able to call you and talk about Monroe College and this blog that you're talking about.
Sure.
If you don't mind helping us.
Sure, be happy to. that'd be one way to get started. And then again, I think doing video, it's not easy, but it's sort of like a 3 or 4 step drill. Once you learn the drill, it works very well.
Okay.
And so that would give you experience in just in interviewing. And I think that's a great way to do term papers, is to find an expert in the subject that you're researching, and go do a video and ask them, you know, after having done a lot of reading, you'll have 4, 5, 7 or 8 questions, and ask if you can video that. And then you've created documented content.
Monroe has many athletic activities, and we have some great athletes, so I'd like to take advantage of that down the road. Okay.
Very good. Yeah, happy to work with you on it. I've got a card if anybody would like it, and you can look up more of our pages. Let's put those out here. And anyway,
And I really do think we have to wrap up because there's
Yeah.
classes coming at 1 o'clock.
okay, we don't want to. But anyway, thank you. It's really fun to be able to talk with you and hear what you guys are doing. And you know, it's everybody's learning in this field. I mean, I'm trying to learn how to use something called Hootsuite, so that if I post some content or write something, I can go on to Twitter and Facebook at the same time. You know, instead of having to write it out twice.
Yeah, I've used some actually some podcasts.
Yeah, it's an app, and it's sort of like a software. I'm still trying to learn it, but everybody's trying to learn. I'm trying to learn how to use blogs more effectively. So we're all in this together, but learning this gives you, as we say, takes you back that every organization is now a publishing company. So it'll create some opportunities for you. And learning how the mechanics work always makes you valuable.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I put down some cards here if you want.